We're continuing our series in Matthew. It won't be long, and we'll be done with Matthew, have gone through the whole book, which is super cool. And today's message that we're going to be talking about, I've titled it, Under the Influence of Something. Under the Influence of Something. Why don't you turn to your neighbor right now and ask them, are you under the influence? Hopefully they said no. I really do, especially in church. I hope they said no. Have you ever had your wisdom teeth taken out? Yeah, lost some wisdom. I've had my wisdom teeth taken out. And you know, whenever they do that, they give you a little something because you don't want to feel your wisdom teeth getting taken out. You know, they give you some anesthetic. They give you maybe some laughing gas. Have you ever had a relative that you had to pick up or maybe was at the dentist's office and they've said a few weird things? Have you ever done that? Have you said a few weird things under the influence of anesthetic? If you've ever gone on YouTube and YouTubed this, if that's a word, it's pretty hilarious to see some of them. And so I was looking at this and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to share at least one with you, okay, that I thought was kind of funny. So this young lady apparently had some kind of oral surgery, and I don't know if she was giving laughing gas or whatever, but she's back home, and this was her experience. This is some of what she said. Here, take a look.
You got me. Grayson!
You killed him.
No, you didn't. Look, he was pretending. It's okay. Look.
I
Hey, look, Catherine, look, Grayson's just fine. He was pretending.
Don't do that again.
Okay, he won't do that again. That wasn't very nice of Grayson.
I would have to speak at his funeral.
You would have to speak at his funeral? What would you say?
I'm so sorry for killing Grayson. Would I be a murderer? I'm like, the rest of my life I'll never go to college or get a job because I murdered my own brother because I am Thor.
Pretty funny. If you do get on YouTube and look at them, then there's some pretty funny ones under there. But yeah, when we're under the influence and you know, things can change, especially when you're under the influence of anesthetics. But we're going to look at a passage today where some guys, in fact, all 12 disciples, in some way, were under the influence. We're under the influence, and Jesus is going to provide the solution in a big way. So to give you some context to this passage, this is Thursday of the last week of Jesus' life on earth. And so Friday, he'll be crucified. Sunday, he'll rise from the dead. So this is Thursday, and this is where he has the Last Supper with the disciples. Okay, so we're going to pick it up in Matthew chapter 26, starting in verse 14. If you're ready, say, oh yeah. Here we go, verse 14. Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, everybody say, ooh, went to the chief priests and asked, what are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you, him being Jesus? So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. So it starts out with this. This is Judas looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. And we're not sure how much the 30 pieces of silver is worth, because is it 30 coins? Is it 30 chunks of silver? We're not exactly sure, but if you look it up, there is some general agreement on 4 months of wages. So we'll just say it's about $20,000. So here, the Pharisees offer Judas $20,000, gives it to him. Then now here is the Last Supper, verse 17. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover? He replied, go into the city to a certain man and tell him, the teacher says, my appointed time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house. So the disciples did as Jesus directed them and prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12, and while they were eating, he drops this bomb. Look what he says. Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. So he drops this bomb on the disciples. They're like, oh my goodness. Verse 22, they were very sad and began to say to him, one after the other, "Surely you don't mean me, Lord." Then Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand in the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to the man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Verse 25, look at this. This is crazy. Then Judas, the one who betrayed him, said, "Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi." That's kind of crazy. I mean, doesn't he know that Jesus knows everything? And yet he's like, "Wait, you don't mean me, Rabbi." And then this is what Jesus says. Jesus answered, "You have said so." Verse 26, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom." Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. Verse 31, then Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me." Okay, so he drops another bomb. Now he's talking to the 11. If you read in the Gospel of John, we know that Judas had left by this point, right after they had the exchange. He had the exchange with Jesus. And so now you just have the 11 disciples. So Jesus now drops another bomb. "This very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied. So Peter speaks up. He's always the outspoken one. He's always got something to say. Peter replies, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I will never fall away." Then Jesus says, truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same thing. Okay, so there's a lot that we could talk about in this passage, but I want to focus in on Judas, the Lord's Supper, and Peter and the disciples. So those 3 areas, we're going to focus on those 3 areas. So here's the main points. If you're taking notes, here they are. Number 1, money isn't the problem, our heart is. 2, pride goeth before a fall. Number 3, Jesus is the new influence. Jesus is the new influence. All right, if you're ready to jump in, I think we already said this, but say, "Oh yeah." Okay, all right, first point here is money isn't the problem, our heart is. It's interesting what Judas does here. He ends up betraying Jesus. I'll read it again. Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver Jesus over to you?" So they counted out 30 pieces of silver for him. Then from then on, Judas looked for an opportunity to betray him. You know, this is kind of crazy. Let's think about this just for a second. Judas was one of the 12. Like, he got picked. I don't know how many people were on planet Earth at that time, but let's say there was at least 500 million. Out of the 500 million people on planet Earth, he's one of the 12 that Jesus picked. Jesus, in fact, the night before had spent all night in prayer with the Father, and then the next day he selects the 12. And Judas is one of those 12. Judas would have been somebody that witnessed all the miracles. He saw blind eyes open, deaf ears to hear, the lame to walk, the dead to be raised from the dead. I mean, he saw all of those things, and yet you have Judas doing something so crazy. He even heard these words right here that Jesus said. He said, "No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." Like Judas heard these words from Jesus. So he knows all of this stuff, and I'm sure he heard it multiple times in multiple sermons that Jesus did over and over teaching the people. And yet he still does this. And then he's got the gall during the supper to say, "You don't mean me," after he already had pocketed the $20,000 from the Pharisees to betray Jesus. I mean, it's pretty crazy. Like, how in the world could someone do this? Almost like we're watching a movie and we're all sitting in the audience saying, like, no, you wouldn't do that. Like, how could a person possibly do that with that kind of experience, with that kind of opportunity for 3 years going around, hanging around Jesus? You would do that to him? How in the world could he possibly do that? And the answer is really simple. He was under the influence. He was under the influence of greed. He had been captivated by money. That's what Judas wanted. And Judas didn't get there, quickly, like any of us. Whenever some kind of sin is in our life, it didn't just pop onto the scene randomly out of nowhere, right? I mean, it's a gradual kind of thing. In fact, we know this from Judas's life, that it wasn't like all of a sudden he's like, I got an idea. I'm gonna make some money off this deal. I'm gonna go betray Jesus. No. Judas had been cultivating something behind the scenes secretly. We find it in John chapter 12. Look what it says. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected, why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. Now, again, this is a story you covered last week where you looked at this woman who came and prepared Jesus' body for burial, had broken this expensive perfume and had poured it out, this alabaster jar. And so Judas is looking at this and saying, why is she wasting all of this? This could have been sold and given to the poor, but look what John writes about Judas. Verse 6, he didn't say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put in it. So Judas he was the financial guy, and he would just take a little bit of money every time he wanted. So he was maybe he was a numbers guy, and he would just take a little bit as he wanted. And every time he took a little extra for himself, he would feed that greed in his life over and over, which is a lesson to us that lust and pride and all these big sins don't just like captivate us and take us hostage. No, it's behind the scenes. We're feeding it just a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. And for Judas, it comes to the head at this moment. In fact, James warns us about this. In James chapter 1, he says, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. That's what happened to Judas. He had fed it just a little bit at a time, behind the scenes, in secret, and it started to grow and grow and grow. And now he's under the influence. He's drunk on greed, and now he's making these horrible, horrible decisions. How did he get there? Just a little bit at a time. A little bit at a time. He ignored the checks. He ignored the opportunities to repent. He ignored what Jesus was talking about. Now, Judas was greedy, but was he a murderer? Let's think about this for a second. Now, was he a murderer? Well, technically, yeah, he handed over Jesus. Jesus ended up getting crucified. But I don't think that Judas wanted Jesus to die. I don't think he wanted him. He might have been greedy, but he was not a murderer. In fact, I believe that Judas had this whole plan like, hey, I don't want to really hang out with Jesus anymore. Like, this is getting pretty crazy. He's making all the Pharisees mad. Like, tension is rising. You know what? I think I'm going to make some money off this. They want something. I'll give it to them. I'll make some money, and I'll go live my own life. And you know what? Jesus is going to be just fine. Because every other time, Jesus has been able to evade the religious leaders. Every time, there's one passage where he just says Jesus just walked right through them. They picked up stones to stone him, and it just said he just walked right through. Judas saw that. Judas saw every time Jesus get away, hide, walk through the crowd, and evade. And he thought, you know what? This is a perfect plan. Jesus is going to be just fine. I'm going to make my money. Then Jesus and the other 11 disciples will go on to do whatever they want, and I'll start my new life. So that's what Judas' plan was. But how many know it didn't go like that? How many know that whenever we let our desires lead rather than following God's plan, it never goes well? And for Judas, it didn't go well. Just like it didn't go well when Adam and Eve did that, when Cain did that, when Samson did that, when David and Bathsheba did that, and it also didn't go well for Judas when they let their desires lead. And we'll read this again. After desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. So Judas, we know later, and we're gonna cover this, but Judas hands over Jesus to the authorities, and Judas sees that Jesus is not fighting back. I imagine when Jesus was arrested, Judas is going back with the mob, and he's like, all right, now's your time, Jesus. Now's the moment. Okay, go ahead and do your thing. Do your judo moves. But he doesn't. And Judas keeps waiting and keeps waiting. He gets more and more nervous. Eventually, Judas realizes Jesus is gonna die. And Judas is the one that handed him over. And we'll read later that Judas will end up actually taking the money and throwing it back at the religious leaders. He's filled with so much remorse, he tries to give the money back to them. But they don't care. And he's filled with so much grief that he wrongly goes and takes his own life. It's crazy. There's a crazy, crazy set of circumstances. He was greedy, but he didn't intend to be a murderer. But you know what? That's how sin works. We might get to choose the sin, but we never get to choose the outcome. We get to choose the thing that we're doing or hiding, but you know what? I don't get to choose how this is gonna turn out. You know what? Judas never intended for Jesus to be crucified or killed, even though that was the Father's plan. We know behind the scenes, he laid down his own life, but Judas realized he was a contributing factor to that. He could have avoided all of it. I mean, Judas could have avoided all of it, and certainly he could have repented, but he didn't. He took his own life. And man, that's the power and danger of what greed can do to a person. So what can we learn? What can we learn from this? Quickly, I'm gonna just look a little bit at what the Bible says. Colossians 3:5 says this: put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Now, oftentimes we could think of idolatry as kind of like an ancient thing. Like, this is what people used to do. They would bow down to this block or whatever, kind of a very archaic, barbaric way of living. But it's interesting that it says that greed is idolatry. I kind of did a back of a napkin definition here of idolatry. We'll pull it up on the screen here. Idolatry is bowing down to an idol, trusting it to give us everything we need. Okay, so that's basic definition of idolatry. Okay, so let's take for a moment, don't pull it up quite yet, but we're just gonna replace a couple words here. We're just gonna replace the word bowing down with obsessing an idol with money and see if we can relate to this today. Okay, go ahead and pull it up. Idolatry is obsessing over money, trusting it to give us everything we need. We can commit idolatry today. Now try this. You can't do that with God, though. Okay, idolatry is obsessing over God, trusting him to give you everything. No, you can't do that. You can't over-obsess with God. Like, if you trust him with everything, that's exactly what we're supposed to do. But if there's anything else in that place, man, that's idolatry. And that's what Paul is warning us against. Don't fall into that trap. Now, I'm here to say, like, money's not bad. Being rich is not bad. What's bad is our hearts. We're loving money. That's what can become bad. This is why that Paul says this. He says, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Now, isn't that what Judas did? He pierced himself with many, many griefs. And Judas, for him, it got out of control. He fed it over time. It didn't heed the warnings. And then he bore the fruit, what he sowed for years. He pierced himself with many, many griefs. I want to challenge you with just a few questions. Just a few questions here at the end of this point. How hard is it for you to give away money? How hard is it for you to give away your money? This is a little bit, and I'm challenging myself with this question. This could be an indicator of where you are with the whole greed thing, so we don't fall into the trap of greed. Because for Judas, I don't think he really didn't realize it. He was blinding himself as he didn't listen to Jesus' warnings. So he did it to himself, but he didn't realize it was all gonna come down like that. And that's why we have to be so careful. So it's important for us to ask some questions like, how hard is it for me to give away money? Maybe another question would be like, when an unexpected expense happens or your kids break something or dent your car or whatever, how mad do you get? How mad do you get? Listen, I'm guilty as charged. I've gotten mad plenty of times over things like that. And then I started to realize, you know what? Why am I getting angry? Why am I getting mad? Because it costs something. Because I value money. Because I want that. Now, hey, I'm all about being a good steward. I don't think we should go around denting our cars intentionally, okay? That's probably a bad idea. You should take care of your house. You should take care of it because, if God gave you that, you should steward it, okay? So that's understandable. But when there's things that are just unnecessary, your kids being your kids, do you get mad at them? Or you just say, hey, they're kids. It's just a thing. It's just material things. That's how you know whether you just have things or your things have you. And that's an important distinction. That's an important distinction. Another question, actually, this is the third final one for this is, okay, this might sound crazy, but I just want you to be honest with yourselves. And I'm gonna be honest with myself, to ask myself this question. Do you fantasize about being rich? Do you fantasize about being rich? Man, if I had $10 million, man, if I had this, if I did this thing and then I got all that money, do you fantasize about being rich? Man, I'm here to tell you, if you're a Christian, you're already rich. You're already rich. You already got it all. All you need to do is realize it. Do you know, Judas had it all. He had it all. He just had to flip his thinking, but he didn't. And that's what we can learn from Judas. All right, the second point, pride goeth before a fall. So the disciples, not as bad as, granted, as Judas, but they did mess up, specifically Peter, okay? He was overconfident in himself. He was overconfident in himself. He's like, no, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna forsake you. I'm not gonna deny you. He was overconfident, even though Jesus was like, I wouldn't be so sure. You're being overconfident. It was just a couple months ago that a conversation came up with some friends about my wife getting pulled over a lot. Like she would get pulled over significantly. Now some of you dudes are laughing because but here's the thing. Like she would get pulled over all the time, but she'd never get a ticket. She'd never get a ticket. I'm like, what are you just batting your eyes? Like, what are you doing? Like, please don't give me a ticket. So I actually haven't gotten a ticket. And so I said to the friends, I was like, well, I've never got a speeding ticket in my life. I've been driving for a long time, never got a speeding ticket. And they were just like, you're so funny. Well, the other day, I was doing the Lord's work and I was driving home and I was going a little quick and I got pulled over and I was like, this is gonna be fine. This is gonna be so fine. The Lord's with me. And very nice, officer was very nice, very nice. And it was funny because I was on the phone with my wife and I was like, I'm getting pulled over. Let me call you back. So anyway, I got pulled over and he comes back with the ticket and I tried the bad eye thing. That didn't work. I tried to get out. No, it's not happening. I told my kids, I'm going to court, kids. I'm gonna fight this one. I'm gonna fight it. So anyway, I was definitely overconfident. So I had to kind of eat my words a little bit and Becca loved it. She's like, you got a ticket? And no, she was super nice. But I still don't know. She's been pulled over like 100 times. Like 100 times and never got a ticket. I'm like, what is going on? Like, what am I not living right? So anyway, I got this ticket, but I was overconfident. And then I had to eat my words there. Well, Peter was overconfident. Look what he says. He says, even if all fall away on account of you, I will never fall away. It's kind of funny that he says that because he's saying it against the other disciples. Like, if all of these other jokers right here, these losers fall away, I'm not gonna fall away. Man, isn't that pride? That's pride. And they all said the same thing. And then Jesus says, no, hold on here. This very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But even then, Peter comes back, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the other disciples said the same thing. It was pride. They had way too much confidence in themselves and way too little confidence in God. Can you relate to that? In seasons in your life where you had just a little too much confidence in yourself and too little confidence in God. This is another trap. This is another thing that can sneak up on us. You're getting ready to make a big decision in your life. Do you involve God? Do you pull him in? Is he a part of the decision? Maybe you're deciding to switch your job or move somewhere, or or kids moving them to schools to a different situation. I mean, are you pulling God in and saying, you know what, I'm not just gonna rely on my own ability to make this decision. I'm gonna rely on God. And because oftentimes we can be dependent and not even be aware of it, that we're being prideful because we're depending on ourselves, but we're really intoxicated with our own pride. And when we do that, it leads to bad decisions, where even Peter is saying, no, I'm good. I'm with you. And just a few hours later, he's disowning Jesus 3 times to a young girl, of all things. One of the Gospels says, as Jesus had been whipped, he turns and looks at Peter the 3rd time right after he denied him. Somehow they were somewhat close to each other, an eye shot, and Jesus was able to see Peter. Can you imagine the grief? Can you imagine the disappointment? Well, I know probably many in this room, including myself, in some form or another, you've let desire get away at some season in your life, and you've reaped the consequence of those things, just like these guys did. At varying forms, some are more destructive than others. And I'm here today to encourage you with this, that Judas could have repented, and would have been a beautiful story of repentance if he just would have turned back to Jesus. Now, Peter, we know later will do that very thing, but I'm here to tell you that if you've messed up, if you let desire go too far, Jesus is ready to forgive you. You just gotta turn to him. You just gotta look to him. He's gracious and kind and compassionate and loving. You just gotta look to him. And this is this 3rd point. Jesus is the new influence. Jesus is the new influence. I love between these 2 characters, these intoxicated characters, is this beautiful story of Jesus sitting down at dinner. And he's saying, hey, this is a new covenant. This is a new covenant. This bread represents my body that's gonna be broken for you. The sacrifice that I'm going to give my life, my perfect life, for your imperfect life. And then this cup represents the blood that I'm gonna shed, because without the shedding of blood, the Bible says there is no forgiveness of sins. There has to be a sacrifice, because our God is a just God. So he thought of this, a beautiful, amazing plan, and gave himself so that our sins could be paid for. That's justice, but then he's also able to redeem us. And right in the middle of these 2 intoxicated guys is the very solution that they needed, which was Jesus. They needed the sobriety that Jesus was able to offer. They let their desires get away from them, and really what they needed was a new influence, was a relationship with Jesus like they'd never had before. And it would be soon that Peter and the other disciples would experience that. Unfortunately, not Judas, but the other disciples would experience that and would receive that. And what I love about the Lord's Supper is this: in the New Testament, it wasn't something that was just taken once. It was taken over and over again. It's never meant to be this thing, I'm gonna take the Lord's Supper, this little cracker and this cup here, and I'm gonna then live how I want. That's never what it was intended to be. It was meant to be a symbolic and representative of Jesus and what he did for us. And that when we participate in that, when we put our faith in him, that's the first right step to overcoming some of these devastating desires in our life. But it's not just meant to happen once. How many know you've got to keep your relationship with God fresh? You got to keep your relationship with Jesus going. And so then that's what he's saying when he said, like, take this and do this in remembrance of me. So what they started there as the Last Supper was meant to be carried on over and over again. And that's what we're gonna do this first Wednesday. So I hope that you come out and be a part of that we're gonna take the Lord's Supper, the bread, the cup, and it's meant to be symbolic so that you can remember what Jesus has done for you. But maybe today, we don't have to wait till then. Maybe today you just need to take some time. you're in a season, maybe there's something going on in your life, you're realizing maybe you're a little intoxicated with some kind of desire, and God is reaching out today to say, don't go down that path. Don't go down that path. Here's the reality, all of us are imperfect, all of us make mistakes, but we don't have to make the mistake that Judas made. We don't have to go down that path. We can, when we make mistakes, should do what Peter did when he repented and turned back to the Lord. I wanna encourage you to do that today. Maybe it could be greed, it could be lust, it could be pride, it could be something, but those things are destructive. If you've given your life to the Lord, which is the first step, now you've got a leg up over those sins, but you still have to walk with him. You still gotta serve him. You gotta cultivate your faith and keep that going to be able to overcome those things, because how many know just because you become a Christian doesn't mean you can't destroy your life? You can. That's why Paul warns us, those people that wanted to be eager to get rich have pierced themselves with many griefs. We don't wanna be that. We wanna do that. Today, God would encourage you to take some steps to put him first. Let Jesus be your influence.